Well, thank you all for joining into this conversation with filmmaker Ben Pflegauf for around his film Forest, I See You Everywhere. This is a film that is screened in the framework of the Haifa Film Festival, the 37th edition. There are two screenings in the actual theater, but the film is also available online. So I wholeheartedly recommend that you watch this wonderful work. And if you get a chance, I would also recommend that you listen to our conversation after you've watched the film, not before. So in case we spoil something ahead of time, you won't be too miffed. So thank you for joining us, Ben, for this.
I'm honored. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Oh, and I forgot to say, my name is Dan חיוטין. I'll be your moderator for today and be asking hopefully intelligent questions. So I'll start with perhaps the most obvious question, less intelligent, but nevertheless mandatory. So can you run by us how this project began, especially how it relates to your short from close to 20 years ago, I think, right?
It was 19 years ago, and it was my first feature. It's called Forest also. The first feature happened because of financial issues. In that time, one of my first project was very first project called Dealer was rejected from the Hungarian Film Fund. And, but I was extremely impatient to do a film. And then, well, it was very hopeless situation. So therefore I thought that I should just sit down and write these short stories and make a film as I can do. In that time, I was watching a lot of Cassavetes movies and that kind of cinema. It's kind of documentary filmmaking, which is not just dogma, but also the Hungarian, we have tradition for that in Hungary. That's what it's called Budapest School. If you Google it, like Budapest Film School, then you will find it. And I was influenced by that thing, and I had a lot of stories going on. And then I made the first one called Forest. And if we are just jumping like almost 20 years, like 19 years, and we're arriving for the second part, which is actually not a it's not a second part, actually, it's more like a standalone sequel. That means some aspect of the film is referring to the first one, but the point is the method, the way of filmmaking, how we make it. So the characters and the stories are not connected with each other. Some actors are in both of them, but in different characters. And so in these days, I have a same situation, desperate situation what I had in that time, which means all the projects what I applied to the Hungarian Film Fund, they are just reject me. So, and that was my situation.
Well, now with the success of the recent Berlin Film Festival, they're probably eating their hats, as they say, hopefully. So I wanted to dive into the film, which I saw and greatly enjoyed and greatly appreciated. And one of the things that struck me, and you were relating to Cassavetes and documentary realism, and I was really struck by the style of cinematography, the fact that you opt almost for the great majority of the film for close shots, even moving between characters rather than cutting, and close-ups on faces. I mean, we're very, very close up to even more than Cassavetes, who would usually do larger frames so his actors can run around and do whatever. Now we're very focused on the face. So I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what the effect that you were trying to get with that really tight focus.
we were gonna speak on the landscape of the human face, which is very crucial. István Szabó, the famous legendary Hungarian filmmaker, said that the most important landscape in the cinema is the human face. And just look at our conversation. You know, when the people have conversation with each other, they have the closet. They have this sometimes, that intimacy, and we have this. And it's quite rare when you speak with somebody who is in the distance. Actually, it's more like yelling or something or screaming. So if we have an intimate conversation, we see this. And the other circumstances, usually, if we are doing this kind of deep conversation about our real topics, rather than the everyday chit chat, so then we usually sit next to each other. And that kind of situation is very interesting for me. So I just wanted to capture this kind of intimacy. And so therefore it was very funny to understand that to making such a film like Forest, to do the casting session, it's also, it's parallelly going with the production design. It's actually the same, because the production design itself is the face of the actors and the other way around. So, so you know, when we choose the actors or the people who participated in this project, we also had to think about the production value of their face, which sounds bizarre, but of course it's a psychological production value.
Yeah, and I think there's something both very intimate, but very stressful a little bit in that proximity, because as perhaps we would think about intimacy in general, this sort of being forced into an intimate setting and having to be really glued to be a close stalker to the other person.
Exactly. Sometimes you don't want to be that close to somebody as you force it to. So yeah, that's the thing. Sometimes the intimacy is just too much. But I think other people intimate conversation can help us to understand the distinct of between us, but also the common roots of the problem. And on the surface, these problems might be differences what the viewers have, but I think generally I can say that all these, especially the way of the arguments of the topics, got a very similar pattern, whatever language you use, whatever culture you are living in.
Yeah, and I think this is exactly the tension that gets felt within this film, and specifically with the cinematography, because we're talking about people who are connected, but in a way disconnected, or are trying to find each other, but in a way get separated, sometimes violently. And I think us as viewers, we have things to identify with the film, yet we're thrown into an intimate situation that is not our own, that is not our family or not our friends, and kind of not let off the hook because we're so close, we can't escape anywhere, right? So yeah.
And if you steal something from the audience, if you don't give something to the audience, then their imagination will work somehow, you know. So you will have a very strange kind of connection with the space itself, because if you just see tiny little objects like props and everyday objects like a mug or something, then your imagination try to figure out the rest of the environment, and that's also a strange kind of suspense what the film can create. And speaking on this film, what is very important for us, or at least for me, is that to make a, how do you call it, like an archive of this situation. So of course with every film, the time when it's passing, years, decades, whatever, and you're looking back for that film, that's gonna give it for another layer of understanding. With Forrest, this kind of method, I think it's important that what we archive is that the actual state of the language what they speak on. I mean, this is more interesting for Hungarian speakers, but every language has this kind of constant qualities, and the very on the surface it's changing a lot, and in the deep it's constant. So and this is very interesting to see, just to understand the perspective. What I'm telling you is that just imagine you see such a film like this from the 20s, like 100 years ago, in Botswana or in New York or in Tokyo or wherever. That would be so great to see how the people communicate, what kind of their cultural background, how it's defined them to continue their arguments and so on.
Yeah,
and in that perspective, it's very interesting to see what is stay with us and what are the new sort of communication skills what we have. So in the end of the day, this film is really about the language. So between us, I can tell you, therefore I was very surprised, like really surprised. This film was invited to Berlinale competition. I was extremely honored, and on the same time, I didn't really. So I thought that it's a kind of brave thing to invite such a film, especially because if you are not a native speaker, it's very hard to understand that kind of nuances. What is there. But it turned out the people understand, so it was,
and I think the sort of absence of, at least for a non-Hungarian speaker and a non-native speaker, I think the absence of that knowledge accentuates the more generalized or abstract or even spiritual parts of universally spiritual parts of this work. And I want to piggyback on your earlier reference about objects, because objects get time here, get sort of focus in a way that we're not necessarily used to, say, in classical filmmaking. Hands, but also inanimate objects, really get foregrounded. And I was reminded when I was watching your film on how within certain, say, quote unquote, spiritual filmmakers, that happens a lot. Someone like Robert Bresson, like Yasujiro Ozu, like your compatriot Bellatar. You mentioned somewhere the dignity of the universe, and I felt that is that you're kind of giving a sense also for our imagination to grow, but also so we can look at things that we normally don't give any importance to, but do have some significance, right?
I hope it's there, this kind of thing. In my career, I made very different films, like the genres or the styles are very different. I made social cinema, I made spiritual film, I made fine art sort of stuff. And with other words, I ruined my career and I ruined my brand. But but there is something which is interesting to see if you see such a variety of works. What is there which is constant, and again, like as we mentioned before, and what is the differences on the surface? And what you mentioned is that this constant focusing for the metaphysical objects through the naturalistic and realistic layer of existence. This is something what I myself found it everything what I made, and it's never my intention. I always want to slip out and doing something else, but this is always there. And actually, it's nice. I mean, I'm happy with this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was struck by the hands holding the wine. I was thinking about the Turin horse, Beltar's film with the potato peeling, and I thought this is very much the same thing for me. Or when I was watching the driplets of water on the floor in the bathroom, and I was thinking about an Ozu shots of a chair, and there's something that because the stories kind of start in the after the beginning and end before the ending, it gives you a moment to move outward from the human drama and focus on something that, again, is seemingly unimportant, but seems to be very significant in the time and the reflection that we put on it. So I think that really surprised me in such an intense film, right? It's so much intensity.
Yeah, it's if you think about that, you just see people are sitting and walking in their rooms, and you have this kind. It's it's a way of observation. It's sometimes you don't need that kind of wide shots to understand the planet, how it works, or just put focus on a very tiny little fragment of our reality can give you the whole. Like it's just like in the holograms, when you break a hologram, the very tiny little particle of it contain the whole, and the whole contain that little thing. And this is in again, I'm very pleased to hear that if you felt that in this film.
Yeah, and I'm reminded of what Andrei Tarkovsky said in his book about how a poetic image is like the whole world in one drop of water. So I think it's kind of the same impulse. But you were talking about the absence of white shots, and this is what I want to also talk about, because really we don't see the broader physical context. You're saying the landscape is of the face, not of the actual place where the characters operate and function, although I assume that there are a lot of markers that would situate them in certain social, cultural milieus. But in terms of the cinematography, they're kind of removed out of a broader context. And I was thinking about the short story being that kind of equivalent in terms of narrative to those close shots that never reveal more than their focus. I was particularly reminded of Raymond Carver's short stories and Shortcuts, the Altman film, who did that. And I wanted, I mean, there's that sense, like in your film, where we're caught in the middle of something whose origins we don't know. We're trying to reconstruct it, or you're actually helping us reconstruct it. And then it ends before it began, even, in a sense. So there's somewhat of an open ending, even when there are very dramatic, violent acts or violent circumstances at the end. So what attracts you to the structure of short stories, short film stories?
Yeah, I think it's an essence of this movie, because if it would be just one single story telling with this way, I think the diversity of our everyday life, or the handling our problems, the diversity of that kind of aspect wouldn't be there. And now we are arriving to that question, which is, how can you select this kind of short stories? So it wasn't like I was sitting down and then writing one, and then to reflect that one, I was writing another one. It was more like there are a lot of this kind of short stories. I mean, it's important to know that I'm coming from the literature part. You know, there are different directors, majority of them coming from the visual part. I came from the literature part, so I wrote a lot. And as I write a lot, therefore I have a lot of little stories inside me that I am just like buzzing like the bees in the hive. That's my head. And the way how I selected the stories was just to pick those bees or wasps, which are the most, you know, aggressive, and they couldn't really let me sleep. I was wake up for that buzzing what they gave to me. And then when I selected, and I was speaking a lot with the script consultant and the others in the crew, that we somehow always understood immediately which is the one which can go into this film. But there wasn't any kind of concept for the storytelling at all, which was very funny, because at the end, when the footage, when we you know, we made the editing in a way, like we not just rough cut it, but fine cut the episodes, and then during the filming, and then at the end we have the fine cut episodes. And then the editor called me and said that, okay, so listen, we have all the scenes. Just tell me how it will
what the order will be. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that was the second question. But the first was that how all these pieces gonna be one? I mean, where's the film? You know, I have different it's a short film, but where's the film? And it was really strange, because I'm actually scared, because then I understood that I never asked such a question. You know, I never asked that, and I had to answer for something. And what you said, the order. I said practically. I said to them, listen, there was two editors. I said, let's figure out an order in a way how we can introduce this word in the best way for the audience. I can tell you one thing, like there is this scene between it's a couple fight, it's a jealousy couple fight about this third woman, the jealousy. Yeah. And then we didn't want to start the film with that one because it's that shaky, you know, that's too much shake going on. And I thought that if I put it at the beginning, then the people will, oh my God, I don't want to have this for 2 hours, you know, overspoken Hungarian movie with very gloomy subjects. And then therefore we choose the one which is just much more, calm in a way. So, this was like practical things, how we choose the short stories or the episodes. And then we made it, and I was like, and then the editors just, put the seed of the anxiety in me with this question, where's the film? So I was also then I became tenseful with that. But then there was an inner voice which said that, but listen, there is this rhymes in the film. There is a rhyme. There is a hidden rhyme in every single episode. You can find it if you analyze it, and not just text-wise, but also the relations, the camera, the way of the camera when we are recording the body language, not just the verbal language. And also, I thought that there are so many rhymes in the film, which is a vortex actually, that wouldn't be any problem. And when we watch the film, of course, some viewers and critics has a problem with the film, but none of them has that problem. These things are not together. Yeah. So this one we achieved, I think.
And I think that I think it's not surprising that you were struck by the question of structure, because it is in many ways an open film, not an entirely open film, but an open film. where things are connected less perhaps in terms of a linear cause and effect, but more musically, as in rhymes. And it's like a collection of stories, or even these stories are so open for me that it's more like a collection of haikus. I mean, we're getting a particular thing, but again, we're looking at a broader pattern, and that broader pattern really connects the stories. But I was wondering, and this is like a tidbit, but I felt I was surprised by it, about something about the editing pattern, because with each of the usual, this is a very open, as again, as said, an open film, but within each story, you essentially start the first shot or shots or at the end of the story, then you get there and move a little past it, and then the story ends. And I just was fascinated about why that particular, if we're talking about rhyme, that particular rhyme, what were you wanting to achieve with that?
That's a good, I mean, it's cool.
Yes, definitely.
You know, somehow, I don't know why, but it has this very, it's a crime, you know, it's a cheap crime sort of tool. But on the other hand, I don't know, it makes it very, especially when you see the second one, when you understand that the structure, you know, then your imagination starts to try to understand at the beginning how it will end in a way. Yeah. And also I have this fascination nowadays with this, perhaps I'm just, I don't know, getting older a little bit, but I like this straightforwardness, you know, when it's something is just so simple, you know, but not reduced, like simple, but it contained the whole. And yeah, and I think it's just when I see the first fragment of the story, this is a little bit like anthropologist observation, you know, if you think about those shots, like those, what you can see from, I wanted to tell you that when I see somebody to walking on the street and do some kind of just sitting down in their apartment, but I did a lot, I saw a lot during the COVID, you know, when in the next house, what the other people doing in their flats. And then I start to, you know, imagine how this act will continue, but I don't see that. So I have to figure out something. And so that kind of thing. And it's also referring a little bit to the Rorschach pattern, you know, when you see something very abstract and your imagination put something there, which is basically not there, but since you are projecting in it, it will be there forever. You know, that's very interesting. And yeah, but answering for your previous question, there is something that I would like to add, is to using the short stories as a structure, that's also very good to, you know, just dancing around the same campfire, but in a very, very different rhythm, but the fire is the same, you know. So it's like we use a lot of very different angles to see the same kind of core or same kind of topic. And if we have just one single story, and of course it can be beautiful, and I like those films, but there is something what you cannot really reach with the one story structure, and there are a lot of things what you cannot reach with the short story collections. That's and this is the essence of the experimental filmmaking. Actually, for me, what I observed, an experimental film can give you just upstart. The experiment film, you never gonna give you that much what the so-called normie film gonna give you in some aspects. And other aspects, it's gonna give you much more from something, you know. And this is the experimental aspect of the filmmaking. And I always end up here, you know.
Yeah. And I think with regards to that editing pattern, I felt like that was part of the dynamic because as you were saying, and I felt that as a spectator, that there's a mystery there. And I'm like a detective, so I can figure it out. And by the second film, the second story, third story, fourth story, I can see the pattern emerging. And even though these films are, these stories are different, I can see that, I can believe that there is a core that binds them together, even if it's this rhyme, and that I can discover that core. So even though it's open, even though I'm the detective, there is a truth out there that I can reach. Of course, the truth that you're talking about is much more abstract and broader than what's going to happen at the end of the film, or who shoots who and why. But I mean, you made me a part of that search in that way. You gave me something that perhaps a very experimental film might have not.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yes, it's a kind of maze where you lost the way, but you don't mind it. When the film works, and there are some experimental films, and this is the part of the business. If you make an experimental film, of course, the possibility to lose the audience is much more than if you do some kind of modules together and make an ordinary film. And sometimes I feel it's Forrest. Sometimes I feel it just succeeded in a way, like you put some effort to understand what you are seeing, and you're gonna have something as a Easter egg at the end.
Yeah, the payoff. So we're reaching at the end of our conversation, but you said COVID, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about filmmaking in the era of COVID. We know that macro budget films productions went to a standstill, but you do micro budgeting and a very small small budget productions. How did COVID affect you in terms of this production? I would imagine there was greater flexibility than making an Avengers film, but at the same time there's still certain
it's well, yes, I mean it was, we started before the COVID, and then we continued during the COVID, and we had to make a lot of tests, and the people were scared. The most difficult part was this guy called István Lénárt, who is already passed away. He was 100 years, like 99 years old when he came to the set. And then this was really like a moral issue. It was a long debate with the family, because of course they didn't want to let him to come to the shooting, saying that here is this guy who survived the 2 World War, and the system changed in Hungary and everything between, and now you wanted to force him to go to the shooting, blah blah blah. And they were right. My position was very tricky, because I really wanted to have him in the film. But on the other hand, I completely understand what they are, speaking. I would agree with them, actually. If I would be in their place, I would also wanted to stop this process. But at the end, István, the 99 years old Budapester, he said that, listen, I'm mentally okay. I have no psychiatric sort of, surveillance on me. So you are not my nurse. I'm an independent person. So I just take my hat and I go there and do what Bence wants me to do. And this was so amazing. I mean, everybody was so touched about this. And then actually, I just remember, I can't forget that last moment, last when we made the last take, and he was, stand up and take his hat and then go. And then after a couple of months, he died. He passed away. So yeah, this was. but you know, this attitude, how he handled the COVID, it staged me a lot. But he was very careful, and we made the test, and he wear the mask and everything. So yeah, this was the most challenging part of the COVID and this film.
Well, it seems like you gave him a final hurrah and a wonderful experience to be close to his last.
And you know why? Especially because he was going into the light, you know.
Yeah,
and of
yeah,
course,
I remember that.
I mean, you know, if you have a conversation with somebody who is almost a century old, then you have a very strange feeling, because on one hand you feel that he's gonna drop dead in every minute, but on the other hand, you can't imagine this guy will die because he survived everything. You know, why now? Why now? Why don't you know? So and I had this strange feeling, but he. So he when he was stand up and go into the light, he said that, you know what you are doing here, Ben said, you are just directing my end of my life, the very last walking, what I go to heaven or hell or what is it, whatever is it. And then, you know, again, I didn't think about, I mean, I thought that it's the end of the character, but I never thought about this, what will this mean to him? Yeah, that was also very, I mean, it still gives me goosebumps.
I mean, the character is suspended between life and death, between the first moment in the film and the last. And I thought when he walked into the light and we had that fade out to white, that's a very cinematic way to die. I mean, cinema is light, and in a way, he returned to the essence of cinematic life, returned to light. So and in that respect, he, as cinema, the image never dies. So I think he continues to be, in a way, dead but not dead, suspended in limbo. Well, we have to go. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me, with us.
I'm honored.
The honor is all ours. And thank you for the listeners and the viewers. I hope you've seen his film by now, Ben's film, but if you haven't, go and watch it. It's a real treat and a very remarkable experience. So thanks again.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ben. Thank you. Bye now.